Does our church have a separation of church and state? Okay. I got this multiple times about the separation of church and state. Okay. Good question. The founding fathers of this country never intended that the separation of church and state be construed or defined as the contemporary media and politics has done. Here's what separation of church and state means, according to the mind of the founding fathers of this country. You remember where they came from? Great Britain, right? England. They were a colony, okay. And England had a state church, right? The Church of England. And life was miserable for anybody who didn't belong to that church. And that, by the way, even in certain countries in Africa, in colonial Africa, was the case. Where you had to be, if you wanted a good job in Kenya years ago, you better be a member of the Church of England. Okay? The church and the state were one. In other words, there was one religion in that country, and boy, they'd put some pressure on you if you didn't belong to that church. That was one of the things they wanted to do, is separate the church or any religion from the government. In other words, freedom of religion. That's what authentic separation of church and state means. It means that people must be allowed to be free to choose their own religion. And I'm all for that. You know, I am not for imposing. I'm for authentic separation of church and state. That means that if a person wants to practice as a Hindu or a Baptist, I'm not saying all religions are the same. That's a heresy called syncretism. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying people must be left free. God leaves us free. They must be left free to choose for themselves which religion. In other words, you can't have a state-sponsored one religion and impose it. That's the number one. That's the primary essential meaning of the separation of church and state. That's number one. Number two, they wanted to keep the state, the government, out of the affairs of religion. Those are the two defining notes of authentic separation of church and state. It is not what is commonly held out today as the separation of church and state, where, hey, if you practice your religion, if you let your religion flow over into the secular order or political, that's not, that you're violating separation. No, that's not what the founding, they'd turn over in their grave. That's not what they wanted. That is not what authentic separation of church and state is all about. Well, you don't know this, but I'll tell you, great pressure. Well, I don't want to get too specific, but in a certain presidential election, not too far away in the past, extreme political pressure, legal pressure, was put upon the Catholic Church not to interfere, because there was a certain candidate who purported to be Catholic and yet spit in the face of authentic Catholic teaching on abortion and some other things too. That person is, technically speaking, along with some others, excommunicated in virtue of the very act. You can't, oh, I'm a good Catholic. Oh, I personally believe that abortion is wrong, but I don't want to let my personal beliefs interfere with my office. You know, in other words, oh, I believe one thing as a person, but I act totally different as a senator or whatever else you are. Moral schizophrenia. You know, how many personalities do you have, Sybil? Senator. You know, I mean, that's a common retort. It's baloney. It's baloney. Weak leadership allows that to happen. Fear allows that to happen. What did Jesus say? Listen, I have a lot of fear too. I wake up perspiring profusely in the middle of the night very frequently. I'm scared of a lot of things. I admit it. Boy, I will wake up frightened. But I'll tell you what, you know what I repeat? The Word of God is very powerful. And when I get scared, I repeat Jesus' words. Jesus said, fear is useless. What is needed is trust. That's right out of the gospel. That's Jesus Christ talking. Fear is useless. What is needed is trust. Man, I have repeated that 1,000,000 times, sometimes from places of great, great pain and sorrow and fear. Fear is useless. Oh, but I fear for my son. He's smoking crack, addicted to heroin. You know, he's a thug. I understand your fear, Mom. Fear is useless. Remember that. Fear is useless. What is needed is trust. I got a picture of Jesus, the Divine Mercy, all over my house. I don't know how many of them pictures I have. And you know the one I mean. It says, Jesus, I trust in you. Well, I want to tell you, I don't know how many times I have said that. Jesus, I trust in you. Jesus, I trust in you. Jesus, I trust in you. Fear is useless. What is needed is trust. I do not believe in a lot of the practice or philosophy which leaves evil alone and hopes or pretends it'll go away and won't bother us anymore. I just don't agree with that. Evil needs to be attacked. You remember what the great prophet Elijah did with the 450 false prophets of Baal? He took them down to the brook Kidron and slit their throats. I'm talking spiritually here. There are a lot of false prophets. There are a lot of liars. There are a lot of promoters of evil in one way or another. And I'm talking metaphorically, not physically. Somebody will report me to the bishop. Metaphorically speaking, the false prophets ought to have their throats slit. I mean, you know, put an end to them with the sword of truth I'm talking about. A failure to do that is a failure in leadership. A failure to, you know, when enough of us overcome that spinal defect of failing to stand up. You know, if you don't have a spine, you can't stand. If you don't have a moral spine, you can't stand up. You won't stand for anything and you'll fall for everything. You've got to have a moral spine. And when enough of us do, oh, the world will change. Can you imagine if 60 million Catholics in this country all of a sudden got their right mind back and had a moral spine? Do you think this country could persist in some of its errors? Oh, no. Things would be different very fast. There'd be hell to pay for a while. But it couldn't go on like this. It's got to happen one way or another. Is a